I'm Dustin. In my last video over a year ago, I had many controversial takes. The most discussed take was whether or not 6v6 would save Overwatch. I argued it would make no difference. Now, after a few seasons of 6v6, I can say I was right. I know this because even though Blizzard doesn't keep us updated on their player distribution, I can compare the leaderboards. All three split leaderboards have top 500 starting in higher elo than the entirety of OpenQ's leaderboard, which means less than a third of the amount of players in Roll Queue are in 6v6. So why didn't 6v6 save Overwatch? The core issue that Overwatch faces is that it has a shallow skill curve. Now, I know that a skill curve is one of those buzzwords that has been used so many times that it has lost its meaning, so I will explain what I am saying when I use that phrase. I can't find anyone that defines it clearly, and most people discuss it in a nebulous way. Coach Spilo, a content creator I respect a lot, has defined it a few times, but I disagree with his definition. A skill curve is impact as a function of skill. In other words, how much skill, or X, is required to achieve an amount of impact, or Y. Now, I know I just threw even more terms at you, but don't worry, I can define those as well. Skill expression is what a player does in a game that represents their proficiency in the game. Just a few examples of this is aim or movement, but also positioning, timing, and map knowledge. Skill expression is the sum of a player's ability at a given game. Impact is the progress a player makes towards their specific goal in a game. In a game where the goal is just eliminating enemies, this is often represented as progress towards an elimination. In other games with other objectives like capturing a point, this progress towards completing that objective. An example of this could be eliminating a player, but it could also be gaining the advantage in a duel and taking control of a lane. Impact is a difficult thing to expressly define, but it is something that if you know what you are looking for, it's possible to see in the smaller big things. A skill curve is a graph that represents the increase of impact relative to skill expression. It's a visual model we use to better understand a core element of competitive game design. A deep skill curve is when there is a wide distance between the skill floor and the skill ceiling. An example of a game like this that I love to point out is chess. It is not a complicated game to begin learning. All that is required is learning how the 6 different pieces move and that the king is the objective, and you can start playing. Mastery of the game requires decades of study and experience, and even at that point, humans can only scrape what computers are capable of. A shallow skill curve is when there is not much difference between the skill floor and the skill ceiling. This can happen when a game is very hard to learn the basics of, or when a game is too easy to master. These games are not conducive to a competitive game, as the difference between those who just started and those at the top is very small. Examples of this would be games like Mario Party or Sorry. These are games that once you learn how to play the game, it isn't much more effort to master the game. Overwatch has a deceptively shallow skill curve. I know how crazy this seems. Overwatch is relatively easy to begin playing for a competitive first-person shooter, with heroes like Torbjorn or Moira, and with heroes like Widow or Doomfist, very difficult to master. But I'm going to have to burst your bubble and tell you that line of logic slips into what is known as the fallacy of composition. This is when one infers that something is true of the whole from the fact that it is true of some part. An example of this would be something along the lines of saying, all of the players on this team are the best at their position. That must mean this is the best team. This isn't necessarily true, as there are other factors such as teamwork that can influence which team is best. Overwatch has a shallow skill curve because the individual heroes in the game have different skill floors and skill ceilings. And rather than looking at the best case scenario, you must look at what the most shallow points are between heroes. This is where the pain points lie. When a Bastion is against a Winston, when a Torbjorn is against a Tracer, and when a Moira is against a Genji, one of these players has to input much more skill to achieve even the same amount of impact. By looking at the individual skill curves of each hero, it becomes evident why the game is frustrating players. Now that I have made it clear to you that Overwatch has a shallow skill curve, I'll explain why adding another tank to your team will not solve the problem. In a competitive game, there are 3 pillars: format, balance, and design. Format is the structure the players play in. This is how long matches are, how many points an objective is worth, how many players compete, etc. Right now, Overwatch 2 has 2 formats, 5v5 role queue and 6v6 open queue, with a different objective depending on the map and different match lengths depending on what the player queued for. Format is something that is changed and updated infrequently by the addition of game modes and maps, as well as changing time rules in progress. Balance is the minor tweaks developers can make to change the numbers of what a player is able to do. This can be damage numbers, projectile size, cooldown duration, projectile speed, etc. Overwatch 2 developers frequently change balance in the game, partly to address pain points and partly to make the game feel fresh and frequently different. Design is the avenue in which a player interacts with the game. In Overwatch, this is the hero itself. This aspect of game development is touched the least, with few hero redesigns and hero launches in a given year. I would guess this is because this is the most resource-intensive aspect of game design. Altering balance only slides the curve along the impact axis. Barring the extremely rare, specific, and targeted balancing tweaks, changing balance doesn't deepen a hero's skill curve. It only increases or decreases the impact relative to skill across the entire graph. Altering format does not change the individual curve of a hero. In format changes, some heroes will have more of an impact and others will have less of an impact, but examining the curve itself, it's evident nothing changed with the individual hero. 6v6 will not make Torbjorn have a higher impact at the top and a lower impact at the bottom. It will only make him more or less impactful across the entire board. Open queue or roll queue are also format changes. A hero will gain or lose impact, but their fundamental curve remains the same. This isn't a concern because balance changes can be made in response. Altering design allows the deepening of the skill curve. Changing Moira to require more mechanical skill and less forgiving positioning will allow a Moira that is a skilled player to get more impact out of the hero and prevent the bad Moira from curb stomping the poor Genji and then disappearing to safety. I do have to address the elephant in the room. I've heard this argument before. I don't want to play 6v6 because it's open queue. If it were roll queue, I bet it would be successful. It's a common sentiment, but it's wrong. As we already discussed, format doesn't change the curve. What you might be concerned about are the weird games in which you don't have a perfect composition of roles. I've gotten top 500 in open queue, in Grandmaster, and roll queue, and I can tell you it comes to be about a wash. The weird games where I don't have enough tank or damage players on my team in open queue happen as often and are as weird as the games where my pool of champions or even my playstyle doesn't fit the teams in roll queue. These weird games happen, and you literally can't win every game. Now that I have convinced you that the skill curve in Overwatch is too shallow, and changing the format of the game will not change the skill curve issue, I will convince you why the skill curve is important for Overwatch 2, and why it should be the focus of the conversation. People deserve agency for their actions. Good deeds should be rewarded, and bad deeds should be punished. A skilled player deserves to beat the less skilled player. A less skilled player deserves to lose to a better player. Understanding why humans deserve autonomy is not within the scope of this video. Go read some Kant. If Overwatch and its community cares about the health of its competitiveness, hero design needs to step away from the strategy of having one hero lower the skill floor and another raising the skill ceiling, and focus on aligning the skill curve of every hero with the Golden Children. I am not a game developer. I know nothing about game development. I will always defer to the people developing the game into a vision they see. However, I do not revere the game developers. My deference does not prevent my criticism. There are heroes in this game that sit too far as outliers, and your attempt to design the game to allow players that don't want to interact with the FPS elements of the game, and those that don't want to interact with the MOBA elements, you have created a shallow skill curve that robs players of their agency. This game was made to be a hybrid, not one or the other. Do not reward the players that refuse to engage with the entirety of your game. Provide avenues for your Moiras and Mercies to express mechanical skill in a way that demonstrably impacts the game. Provide avenues for your Ashes and Widows to be more easily punished for positioning and timing. Once the game has a deep skill curve, changing the format and the balance to keep things fresh and exciting would be great. But until we can feel the game is wholly competitive, it will be a cycle of balance and format changes that will never address the core frustrations the community feels.